Welcome to this explainer of Clive Aldred's incredibly provocative book, The Emperor's New Agents. Have you ever stopped to wonder who actually controls the AI you use every single day? Well, today we're going to objectively unpack Aldred's thesis, and it's a big one. He argues that this massive AI boom we're living through isn't the technological renaissance we've been promised. Instead, it's more like a hostile corporate takeover of human cognition and our physical infrastructure. Aldred, who's an economic analyst, is basically challenging us to look past all that dazzling software and really examine the heavy machinery and the massive financial incentives operating right beneath the surface. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's start right where the book starts, smack in the middle of those gleaming Silicon Valley conference halls. You know the ones. You've probably seen these keynotes, right? Executives pacing across massive screens, pitching agentic AI as this flawless digital butler that can see, hear, remember, and just completely anticipate your every need. Aldred points out that to the average person, this looks like pure magic. It perfectly captures Arthur C. Clarke's famous adage about advanced technology. These demos are totally flawless, highly choreographed illusions, and they are specifically designed to trigger massive FOMO, fear of missing out, for both investors and enterprise buyers. They want everybody believing this AI is basically a sentient deity, so that nobody looks too closely at the actual accounting ledger. But here's where Aldred offers a pretty cynical twist on Clarke's quote. He proposes that the fundamental question of our era isn't actually how smart the AI is, or even how human-like it seems. Instead, we need to look at the architecture of the system and ask, what is its extractive value? Aldred argues that throughout history, the absolutely massive fortunes aren't made just by creating new wealth. No, they're made by positioning yourself as a gatekeeper between a producer and a consumer, and then charging a toll. So that brings us to Section 1, the AI magic show, and this idea of an ethereal illusion. We're constantly sold this ethereal illusion, that frictionless, stark white text box that spits out answers in 3 seconds flat. It feels totally weightless. But Aldred heavily emphasizes the industrial reality behind it. We're talking about a grinding, unyielding industrial complex. Massive data centers spanning multiple football fields, deafening cooling fans, absolutely stressed global supply chains, and power grids that are being pushed to the brink. We interact with what looks like simple, clean software, but the economic reality is a lot closer to a heavy, centralized utility company from the Industrial Revolution. And, as Aldred points out, the machine only appears weightless because somebody else is carrying the weight, and you better believe they expect to be paid handsomely for it. To understand exactly how they get paid, we really have to look at how AI processes language. Aldred defines tokens as the atomic penny of thought. The system literally chops human language into arbitrary fragments and assigns a price to every single one. He argues that this tokenization isn't just some quirky technical necessity. It's actually a brilliant financial instrument. By forcing all AI interactions through a toll booth controlled by just a few mega corporations, Wall Street has literally found a way to monetize the exact act of thinking. It's a wild concept. As Aldred puts it, you're no longer a user. You're a tenant in your own mind, paying rent per syllable. And to make matters even worse, the author highlights 3 massive inefficiencies to argue that these underlying systems are actually engineered for waste. Seriously, treat these next 3 points as the core revelations of the book. First up, the corporate ghost. To answer a totally simple question, AI companies route it through manager, worker, and quality control AIs. You end up paying a triple tax, not because the tech actually demands it, but because it mimics bloated 1950s-style corporate bureaucracy. Second is context stuffing. Because AI suffers from algorithmic amnesia, asking a 10-word question about a 100-page contract forces the system to reread that entire contract every single time. Imagine tearing down your whole house and rebuilding it just to open the front door. And finally, processing video AI at 30 frames a second through a language model, it's a thermodynamic nightmare. It's basically like leaving a massive diesel engine running 24/7 just to power a single light bulb. Aldred's point is that this deliberately inflates usage metrics and billable tokens. Moving right along to Section 2, the dependency trap, and the very real danger of increasing switching costs. Now consider the trajectory of this digital butler. First, it just assists you with simple stuff, right? Like managing your calendar. Then it steps up and starts coordinating your emails and your documents. Finally, it integrates completely with your customer databases and actually starts making business intelligence decisions. As the AI moves from just assisting to outright deciding, businesses become entirely dependent. They effectively stop owning their own operational intelligence and start renting it. They rent it from what Aldred calls a cognitive landlord. And this brings us to a foundational economic reality of the tech world. You really need to grasp this. The real product being sold here isn't intelligence. The real product is dependency. Wall Street doesn't just fall in love with cool tech, they fall in love with cash flow. And dependency generates amazing, recurring, high-margin revenue. Once a company embeds an AI into all of its daily workflows, trying to leave becomes an absolute logistical nightmare. That creates insurmountable barriers to entry and totally locks in future cash flows, setting up the perfect monopoly. Let's transition over to Section 3, the hidden infrastructure, and tracking the flow of that money. Here, Aldred posits that there is actually no AI energy crisis at all. There's only an AI code crisis. He breaks it down into a few parts. First, the current free or super cheap AI we're all using, that's just a subsidy illusion. It's essentially a teaser rate on a subprime mortgage, designed to destroy open-source competition and completely hook the global economy. Second, by absolutely insisting on using incredibly wasteful, centralized cloud computing, big tech has fabricated a manufactured electricity crisis. And finally, he claims hedge funds are using this fake megawatt myth to push unproven small modular nuclear reactors, or SMRs, onto the grid. According to the book, the hedge funds don't even care if the AI works long-term. They make their billions upfront on subsidized debt and construction contracts. And the absolutely crucial takeaway from Aldred here is that they are passing all of that financial and environmental risk directly onto the taxpayer. To explain why this centralized control is so incredibly important to these companies, the book draws a really fascinating historical analogy. Way back in 1901, Nikola Tesla built the Wardenclyffe Tower. His goal was to provide free wireless energy to the entire globe. But J.P. Morgan crushed the project, allegedly asking one simple question. If anyone can draw power from the air, where do we put the meter? Aldred argues that today, big tech companies are basically the modern heirs of J.P. Morgan. They are trying to crush decentralized open-source AI because they share that exact same ultimate capitalist desire. At the end of the day, you have to put a meter on it. Now, Aldred makes a set of highly charged political claims here, which we are just objectively reporting on to understand his thesis. He argues that this AI infrastructure land grab is part of a much larger, century-long pattern where capitalist classes and fossil fuel cartels actively suppress any kind of decentralized survival. He cites examples like corporate lobbying against rainwater catchment, fighting rooftop solar initiatives, and crushing debt-free 3D printed housing. The book even claims there's a deliberate push to pollute ecosystems just to enforce planned obsolescence. The idea being that humanity is engineered to remain endlessly dependent on metered resources just to get something as basic as clean water or air. So AI, in his view, is just the final frontier in this quest to literally put a meter on your intellect. But it's not all doom and gloom. That takes us to Section 4, the open source rebellion, and taking the power back. The book definitely doesn't end in despair. The author introduces a concept he calls the edge paradigm. And he doesn't just frame this as some cool tech trend, he views it as an act of profound economic defiance. Think about it, running a seriously powerful AI model entirely locally on a standard $1,200 laptop. It's basically the digital equivalent of slapping solar panels on your roof. By computing on the edge, meaning on your own device, rather than in the cloud, you completely sever the cord to the centralized data center. You starve those hedge funds of their lucrative cloud contracts, and you render their massive nuclear power plant grift entirely obsolete. To prove this is actually possible today, Aldred points to a very specific toolkit of open-source solutions. We're talking about tools like Llama, Whisper, Lava, and LanceDB. They are all available right now. He specifically dives into the art of quantization. If you haven't heard of it, it essentially means compressing these massive, heavy AI models down so they can run perfectly smoothly on the everyday consumer hardware you probably already own. The overarching point he's making here is incredibly empowering. You do not need a billion-dollar API budget to build an enterprise-grade agent. The tools are literally right there, right now, empowering everyday users to bypass those corporate gatekeepers entirely. And to completely dismantle that whole AI needs nuclear power narrative, Aldred actually shows us the math. He compares a smart, open-source, event-driven architecture, one that, for example, only processes camera frames when motion is actually detected, against big tech's brute force cloud approach, which just continuously processes 30 frames a second no matter what. The results? The intelligent, local, event-driven system uses 99% less energy. It's wild. It completely proves that we don't actually need massive, humming server farms, draining the global power grid. In Aldred's view, the whole energy crisis is basically a lie propagated by inefficient, greedy monopolies. So we're going to leave you with the ultimate, really provocative question posed at the very end of the book. As AI inevitably integrates into absolutely every facet of our daily lives, we really have to look past the magic tricks and start looking at the ledger. In a future where intelligence literally functions as a centralized utility, are you the owner of your own mind, your own data, and your own decisions? Or are you just a tenant, forever paying the meter to a cognitive landlord? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we really encourage you to keep questioning the infrastructure behind the magic.